Hey y'all, it's Zack, the legal tech advisor here at Lawyerist, and today I'd like to talk to you about local services ads. I've got Jim Christy, the CEO of Postali, a digital marketing company for lawyers, with me to explain exactly what that is, because quite frankly, I'm not always sure. Jim, thanks for being with me.
Yeah, you bet, Zach. Good to be here.
So I think a lot of our listeners, a lot of our readers are familiar with the term local services ads. Many of them have probably, explored this, but help me with this. What are we talking about when
Yeah.
we're talking about this?
Yeah, we're talking about a specific type of ad that Google they launched several years ago, and they've been around. They started out in home services for the most part, and
Hmm.
it was made available to attorneys about, I think, 2 Octobers ago, so 2 years ago for attorneys.
Okay.
And this was really revolutionary when they came out because it was the first time that Google had really done a pay per contact model through their ads.
Hmm.
Historically, your options with Google have been pay per click, where you're really banking on a certain amount of those clicks turning into contacts,
Okay.
or display advertising, where it's more awareness based. So this was the first time that Google gave attorneys in particular the ability to for a pay per lead model, which is obviously much more predictable for folks who are wanting to invest their money in trying to generate cases online.
Right. So a pay per lead model is kind of like somebody actually clicks on the ad that, because we're talking about ads in the Google search interface.
Yes.
And so
Yes,
pay per
correct.
lead is not just eyes were on it, not just it was served up to somebody. Somebody actually clicked on this thing and was
Correct.
okay.
Yeah, so let's just start with a screen share because I think the visual here, everybody's familiar with what a search engine result page looks like, but it's hard
I hope
to
so.
describe it. Yeah, we hope, right? But it's hard to describe some things. So let's do a
Yeah.
kind of screen share and let's walk through what we're really talking about here.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Excellent. So what we're talking about is this is a broad categorical search
Hmm.
around a car accident attorney. And the types of ads that we're talking about here are these right at the top.
Okay.
The reason why it's really relevant for us to be talking about these ads now, in addition to I think if people were not early adopters to this, it's great that we can bring awareness to it because it is something that anybody who's spending money on marketing should be thinking about.
Hmm.
But the other reason it's really interesting for us to talk about them now is that we're getting to a point of maturity with these ads that the decision making process of should you do them and what to expect with them is becoming different. And
Okay.
almost everything that Google produces it comes out, with a lot of shine on it, and they really want you to try their new thing. And
Hmm.
for a long time, we could say that this new thing was probably the best way to the most predictable way to spend your advertising dollars
Okay.
over maybe the first 12 to 18 months of these local service ads coming live for attorneys. And we're in this phase now where maybe that's not always the case. And so I want to talk about that a little bit today too. I want to talk about how these function and how they're set up so that if anybody listening wants to do a little bit of DIY or wants to understand more, we'll provide that today. But also start to think about if I'm already spending money to generate leads, is this something I should add? Or maybe it's even time to stop doing these because we're advising some of our clients to actually pull back in some areas and reinvest in traditional PPC because the
Okay.
costs are climbing. So hopefully we can get
Before
through all of that today.
Yeah, before we go too far, just kind of putting
Yep.
this against PPC. So this is LSA, local services
Yep.
ads, and then PPC is what? Just to make sure we're
PPC are the ads that look like this. They're going to look more like traditional search results.
hmm
So in the way that these things are functioning, so these are really kind of like nested in with organic. As we can see, there's two
Yeah.
sponsored listings. These are PPC ads. If somebody clicks on these or somebody clicks on the site link extensions,
hmm
that attorney is going to get charged for that click, regardless of what I do after I click. I could
Okay.
click and leave in 30 seconds. Comparatively, here, I can click through and I can view the profile. And I'll
hmm
just do that real quick. I can view the profile, and I can also see a whole lot more people who are willing to invest in these ads.
Okay.
And I can call from here, but the intent is not for someone to click through here. And this attorney did not get charged by me clicking through.
Okay.
Just as I'm not costing people money out here. They're really intended primarily to be a mobile ad, even though they show up on desktop.
Okay.
We see almost all the activity on a mobile ad because you just click to call, and that's the intent. That's what Google wants. They want you to say, okay, it's screened. I have this verification. I can see when they're open, their background checked. I can see their ratings. Let me just message, which now is available to come through as a text or as an email message that you can pick up a conversation within the Google Local Service Ads platform, or call. And this is primarily what people are doing. So an attorney's only getting charged when I click these and I complete the action. So that's how these are working. Very different from what we're seeing down here, where you're just getting charged every time somebody clicks.
Okay. So yeah, that would be, I mean, theoretically, that's a lead as opposed to just eyes.
Right. And to take that further, when we talk about there are all kinds of ways to peel the onion back of what happens next. If I click on this and I call this attorney and I never actually speak to anybody, I just get a voicemail. Google's not going to charge you for that either, because it's not a connected call. They're going to go through and automatically credit that back. Now, the problem with that is these ads run in a different algorithm than these ads do. So I think this is important to talk about from the standpoint of, if you're trying to show up in these two places, it's not just, are you willing to spend more than the people who are listed here down below? It's much more of a combination of, there is a payment piece of it, but it has a lot more to do with engagement and star ratings. So does Google think that you're a valid person to connect this potential lead with? So your review velocity, your review quality matters a whole lot more here. You don't have to have any Google reviews at all to be showing up in pay-per-click ads. You have to have a minimum of 5 currently to even be set up. And you can actually increase your exposure by being more diligent in getting reviews. So we kind of think about it as like this hybrid between the way that we think about Google local maps visibility, which is highly dependent upon review volume, quality, and velocity. So it is this kind of marriage between the two, where you can't just pay your way to the top, whereas this person is paying more than this person. And it's not, and the only quality measurement has to do with, are the landing pages that these attorneys have created, are they relevant to the query? So that's really the only quality piece. It's not like, does the firm have good reviews?
Okay. And so the person at the top of that PPC has bid and said, I will pay more to be at the top.
Correct.
I think you and I have talked about how I used to view SEO with the Simpsons episode, where they're both praying to win the softball game. One of them yells, it's no use, Flanders, we're praying to, and you can't both win. So it's that we can't both win thing.
Right.
But this is much more like it seems like Google is thinking about this from the reverse aspect of, like, how relevant is Google? Are they going to be thought of well when when somebody clicks into here? Are they serving the best that they can figure using the algorithm that they're
correct?
Okay.
Yeah. There's definitely more of that, more algorithmic components to this, because and this is one of the downsides to local service ads. So, like, let's start to talk a little bit about pros and cons of these two types of ads as well. So a pro, obviously, like we said, you only pay when someone contacts you. And not only that, you also have the ability to dispute a lead if it comes through in a category that you don't actually want, or a geographic area that you don't serve. So on the back end, and we can share this a little later on, the profiles that you create for your firm are actually pretty simple. It's very streamlined, so that you don't have to be a marketing agency to set these up. So you're going to choose what geographic areas you serve, and you're going to choose what practice areas you serve. And if you get a call for something outside of that area, as long as you clearly state in the call that this is not something that you handle, Google will more often than not give you credit back for that.
Okay.
So you can dispute it. We do advise people to only dispute when they're really, truly out of area, and not just because, hey, maybe this client didn't have money. If you're a criminal lawyer and they're like, you quoted a fee and they said, oh, I can't pay that. That's not a valid reason to dispute. Like Google does have some AI on the back end listening to these calls. So you need to be pretty clear. You can't pull the old, like, hey, we don't do this, but let me text you on my other phone. They're going to catch on to that and they're going to stop showing it.
I don't handle cases that people aren't going to pay me for. So, I mean, like, that is a case.
Yes.
That is outside.
And lawyers being great at arguing, that is something that it can be true and it can also not be valid for the dispute policy. So
that's
yeah.
funny.
Yeah. So that's definitely a pro. Now, a con is that you don't get the level of granularity that you get here. So what I mean by that is, because there's not a lot of specificity of keyword matching, like these ads are run by somebody building a campaign and matching search keywords to what they want to show for. And you can get really granular with that. So for example, if you're a personal injury attorney that only handles wrongful death cases, for example, you may have very specific keywords that you want to show up for. And it might be really hard to make that happen through local service ads because you don't have the levers to pull on the back end to shape what that should look like. You may end up either not getting any exposure because you've only chosen one category of wrongful death in the back end, or you might start to get exposure that's broad categorical for personal injury because you can't turn off personal injury lawyer as a category. And this is a really key thing to think about. Like if you want cases that are niche, you may have a hard time getting them through local service ads. And you may get a lot of things that you don't really do because you're going to get categorical searches that don't align with what your needs are. So a good example of this is we have a client that works in funeral home negligence. So really niche, right? And we can't get funeral home negligence cases through these with any predictability. We have to go here and we have to be very specific with our terms.
Okay.
And sometimes go ahead, Zach. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Ranting.
Well, I mean, you and I have talked many times, so I think we're comfortable interrupting each other. Sorry, viewer. So the kind of the idea is, yes, in these LSAs, we're only getting charged for the time that somebody might call, but I might get more stuff that is, it's still close to what I do, so I probably couldn't dispute the call, but it's not what we do. It's not really what we do. And so if I am just broad personal injury lawyer that is taking whatever that walks through the door that's personal injury, great. I'm going to get out there, but I'm only going to get the ones. But if I am granular, I'm going to get a lot less eyes. I'm going to get charged for every eye, but it would theoretically be more valuable eyes that they're serving it to in the PPC.
Correct. And to kind of really hammer that point home, something that we see in a search like this, which is what we would consider to be a little bit more long tail, we don't even get a local service ad pack showing up. We just get traditional pay-per-click ads and organic listings, followed by, not even any maps on this page. So you're not going to show up here for this type of term. And I would say, in fact, like what we're seeing here is that these attorneys they're showing up because they said lawyer for accident. This head injury piece is actually not super relevant to any of these results. No one has a landing page for head injury like this person does for organic listing. So this is where we start to get in the weeds, and we'll back up a little bit. But here's another reason: like you may just not get no exposure because you're fishing for things that are too narrow.
Okay.
So, cool. So let's kind of go back a little bit and, pros and cons again. So I mentioned that this is an interesting time to talk about this because of one of the things that we're seeing with the maturity of these ads. So, and what I mean by that is this, like when this program first came out and very few attorneys were signed up, a standard, and I'm using personal injury, but I'll use some other practice areas as an example as well. A standard cost per contact here was around between $100 and $150. When we think about that for like a personal injury lawyer, that's really cheap, all things considered, when we think about other aspects of paying for things. And for criminal defense, we saw rates between 50 and 70. For family law, it was maybe 20 and 30. And estate planning, immigration, those types of firms, we were seeing rates of like $10 to $20. So they really were cheap. But what we're seeing now is that as there's more competition and Google is putting a price floor on these, like these for personal injury are getting close to like the $300 to $400 range now. So we've got like a 3x increase over this lifespan. So we're starting to get to the point where, depending on how curated your PPC campaign is, you might actually be getting at kind of like an intersection of these two lines of which one is more effective to use for your firm in particular. And I think that's why it's really interesting to think about this now as people are thinking about how they spend their dollars.
Okay. Yeah. And when it starts to get up to that $300 range, getting that one that you can't quite dispute, but it's not in your wheelhouse, is a little bit, it burns a little more, hurts a little more.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I would say, I know that, the folks that work with Lawyerist are in a whole lot of different practice areas. And what we tend to see is that the problems that are going to come for everyone else typically start in the personal injury world because of the amount of investment that happens. Yeah. So in some markets, we're starting to see personal injury really saturated. Lead calls are $400. Criminal defense is becoming the next most saturated. Lead calls are getting close to like $150 now. And so then it's typically family law after that and the states after that and all of that. So if you're a firm who has kind of had these on and just running and assuming that they're going to continue to be a really good ROI, it might be time to reconsider. Now, there are levers to pull, and I think this is important. So this is where it's like, if we're speaking to somebody who's doing a little DIY approach and they're managing this, let's kind of pivot into what levers do you actually pull and what does your profile look like? I think that's probably a good place to transition when we start to think about the cost.
Yeah.
So any questions before I pivot into that, Zach?
No. This is
okay.
Yeah, perfect.
Cool. So let's shift to family law, for example. And so this is an established local service ads account. It's up and running. It's been running for, probably a year and a half at this point. But this is what the back end of everyone's looks like. When you set it up, if you're doing this on your own, you'll set up all of these parameters at the very beginning. So the back end dashboard comes kind of pre-filled. And you'll also start out with understanding what your budget is and your job types. So job types this is when I said you're always going to have a categorical search like family lawyer. Because this category is turned on, this firm is always going to get they're going to show up for queries that Google thinks are related to a broad categorical family lawyer search. What we're saying is that, okay, that's great. We'd also like searches related to these other things that we've turned on and not to the ones that we've turned off. Okay. So what this allows us to do is, like, if we get a call for mediation, we can dispute that, or the lawyer can dispute that. Say, I don't handle that area. That's not something that I'm taking cases for. So this is a way to limit what we get. But again, we can't get any more precise than what we see here. This is the extent of our keyword matching.
Okay, yeah, because that's created by Google. They've created this interface. So if somebody types in family lawyer and I've got this specific thing turned on, I'm going to come up. But if somebody types in family lawyer mediation, I'm not going to.
Right.
Theoretically.
Right. Exactly. Okay. Yeah, theoretically. And if someone types in something that is a more unique query, but Google says it's a close variant to this, you're going to show up for that too. We see that, and that's how some kind of unusual leads come through. So this is one big lever that you can pull as a manager of how do you shape what you're getting. The other big lever is your budget. So your budget can be controlled in a couple different ways. It has to be set weekly. So this is an interesting thing, that's the only duration of time that they allow you to set. And there are two separate bidding modes. There's a maximize and a more like granular discrete. So right now this campaign is on maximize. This is what Google recommends, because what this does is this allows them to treat those local service ads like an auction marketplace, just like the pay-per-click marketplace is. This is the other fundamental difference that's changed over time. Like, we could be pretty certain that we were going to spend a fixed price per lead at the early outset of local service ads. Now we see a lot more volatility if we have this recommendation turned on. If in a competitive market, we might see a lead come in for $150 and then another lead come in for $400. Okay. And that's because Google is using their machine learning to determine when to show you and how much you're going to pay for that.
Okay.
Versus you can set a manual, and for family law, the minimum here is $40 per lead. And so this is preset by Google. So if you set up a campaign for yourself, or you're working with somebody and you say, I don't want to pay more than $20 for a lead. Sorry, it's not possible.
Not happening.
Like Google requires it. Yeah. And you can kind of see if you try to test this and you say, I want to spend $20. Okay. The minimum bid is $40.
Fair enough.
Sorry about your luck.
Well, people want to pay lawyers $20 an hour, but you're probably not going to be able to, I'd like to pay most people.
Yeah.
Okay. So with that, how am I I guess, how am I going to know, okay, my annual weekly budget, or my weekly budget is $700. Can I, if I'm doing it manually and I'm saying I only want to pay 40, is there a way, because I'm not going to compete against those auction people. Am I even going to be seen if I'm not putting enough money into it?
So that's part of why they put the floor in. They put the floor in knowing that a section of the available lawyers who are bidding on this are going to go low, and then there's going to be a section of people who are going to say, I'm going to get as many leads as I can. And there has been kind of a balancing thus far, but we're seeing less and less of this. So in the early stages, you could tell that Google was really shuffling through and making sure that anybody who wanted to spend money, if the inventory was available, you would get some leads. You would just get a lower quantity of leads if you were spending less. Okay. But we're seeing that shift a little bit now as well. So people who are only willing to spend the very lowest amount are getting pushed out a little bit right now. And I think that's going to continue just because of how this goes.
It's a business.
It's and Google is trying to attract people into this platform, and then as it grows, they're going to change the rules of the game, which they do, and that's their thing.
Is how all platforms eventually go as well.
Yeah. The other thing to think here is that the average weekly budget is also set by practice area. So I think the floor for most practice areas is around $300 a week. Some of them are a little higher, but again, if you're someone that's like, man, I really want to spend no more than $500, like, you're going to have to be willing to put a budget in that's higher than that and try to manage that through like the individual lead. So this kind of gets into like, how would you manage the spend? Okay. The last thing to think about here is when you think about where do you want to show. So if you say practice areas, budget, and geography are kind of the three levers that we have to pull. You can get really granular. This happens to just be Allegheny County. We're just serving to a county. But you can choose a zip code. You can choose a state. You can choose cities. You can choose any number of different combinations. Just keep in mind that it's never going to be perfect. This is something we always want to advise people. Like, if I happen to be driving through Pittsburgh, but I live over here, and Google thinks that I'm still in Pittsburgh, they're going to show the ad. So just be aware that there are some false positives, and this always happens. It's one of the biggest questions that comes up of like, I'm getting a lot of calls from like peripheral areas. What's going on? It's like,
Okay.
oh, maybe that person works in the area that you have targeted, or maybe they've traveled through there, or things like that. So those are all the levers to pull. And this is actually strategically, if you are one of those folks that want to spend a really low amount, one of the ways that you can control that is like put the budget in that Google requires, that somewhere in the neighborhood of like 1,200 a month, but limit your geographies to really small areas.
Okay.
And you're gonna limit your exposure, and then you can slowly build over time. So even though the budget may say, you can't dispute it if Google actually spends it, but if you constrict your geography and you constrict your bid prices, you can really make sure you don't spend that full budget by doing that. And I think that's kind of one of the misnomers that we hear often. It's like, it says that I have to spend $1,500 a month. Like you don't have to. You can shape the campaign to serve your needs if you're on the lower side of the spectrum.
Okay. So kind of in the same way of like sometimes the choices you make are going to make it to where you're just not going to get as many calls. Okay. Well, maybe you use that to your advantage.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. Great. So that's kind of the back end. The other thing that is, unless you're running these already, that would be very different from anything else that you've done from a paid ads perspective, is you actually get like a dashboard to manage. Like if you run traditional PPC, you don't have you have a ads platform to manage what's happening with the ads, but your leads are all coming through their own, like just your website, or it's going into your CRM. Here, you actually have a leads inbox that you can manage. This is probably one of the most challenging things to know the value of using this and convincing your staff or yourself that this is something you should use.
Right.
Like, and this is like operational management 101. I think this is a good time. I should have said this earlier, but one thing that I mentioned, engagement matters a lot with how much you show, not just bid or things like that. You have to answer your phone. We've seen where firms will start out and they'll have a great amount of lead volume and it's at the price that they want, but they only answer their phone 50 to 60% of the time. And Google sees that, and then they think of that as an engagement issue, and they stop showing your ads. And it's really hard to get visibility back in competitive markets once you're kind of on that list of, oh, this person doesn't answer their phone. If you're in a weaker market, it's not as much of an issue, but like you have to have a mechanism to answer your phone. Otherwise, you're going to lose visibility long term.
And that's live answering, not just having a voicemail, because Google is
live answering.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Because they are, I mean, like it or not, they are reading the transcripts of those calls through AI and at least determining whether they think the call was valid. I mean, that's the nature of where we're at.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So the dashboard piece, there's a phone app and there's the desktop dashboard. All of the leads that come through these, you can manage. You can see that they're from LSAs, and you can manage them independently. You can click through and add customer name. It says the business category it came from. You can add details, and you can also listen to the recording from here. And if you really want, you can mark it as booked, meaning they made an appointment. So this is Google trying to move into the space of competing a little bit against like marketing attribution services or even CRMs to a point, because these were originally intended for smaller businesses that don't have heavy infrastructure.
Yeah.
So this is like kind of the one-stop shop. You can do everything here. And you can also dispute your lead from here.
Okay.
So that's what this interface looks like. Or you can archive it. So once you have your leads coming in, you manage it here. What we have seen is that most firms don't want to manage them this way. They have their own way of managing them, and this largely stays just like this, blank. And that's okay. We don't know what kind of issues this has with visibility by not engaging with the back end of the platform.
Yeah, I'm curious about that a little bit. Yeah. So just to kind of clarify, the reason that Google is able to access the recording and all that of that call is because it went through the Google platform. If this
Correct.
caller, if this potential client calls you on their phone, just straight up from their phone later, the next time, they're not recording that call. They haven't just gotten between you and the client. I just want to kind of clarify that for confidentiality purposes and whatnot.
Yeah. So that is a thing that's come up several times is Google requires that you use one of their routing numbers for the initial call.
Okay.
You'll input your phone number where you want the call forwarded to, but Google will put their phone number in. It'll forward to the number that you want it to, but that first phone call, it reads the user message. It says this call is being recorded. And we always advise that anytime somebody calls through, ideally, anytime somebody calls through a marketing phone number, the firm should say, okay, from now on, use our local phone number so that it's not interfering with attribution and other things like that. But especially with local service ads, you should say, hey, that number you called initially, don't call that one anymore. Use this number.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. So that's kind of the platform. Pretty straightforward. I mean, for anyone who's done Google PPC, the difference in complexity between this and a PPC account is just night and day. Like we tell our clients all the time, like you should not be managing your own paid search PPC. It needs way too much hand holding, even with automation. This, it's kind of up in the air. It's like, if you have the time and you want to interact with it, by all means, and we'll kind of give you some guardrails or jump in as needed. Larger spend clients, I think they do need a little bit more troubleshooting when things aren't working. But for the most part, this is a great tool that can be managed by an agency or managed by a firm or someone in the firm.
Because there is some strategy that goes to this, like you're talking about, but the actual tool itself, the literal pulling of the levers. This is not nearly as complex as Facebook ads.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's really just having somebody, like you said, to help determine that strategy and then keep you apprised of things that are changing the platform. Right. Because we have seen some strange things in the platform. We've seen automatic applications of geographic areas that don't make any sense. And this gets really tricky when both our team and the lawyer's team has access to it. And we go, oh, we don't have a record of that ever changing. And the client goes, we don't have a record of that changing. But some of those like suggested areas, we have seen them auto apply. And I don't know if that's a glitch or a bug, but we've seen it on a couple different occasions. And that has some implications and sometimes needs worked through. But and I think to kind of button all of this up, I think what we're really saying is that this is, and I'll kind of go back to a different screen share here, is this is just prime real estate. At the end of the day, like as much as we talk through the weeds and how this works and everything, like it's really prime real estate. And if your firm has not yet been set up on local service ads, I would really encourage you to do it, even if you don't intend to run them right away, because having setting it up is very simple. And you can turn it on at a very small scale and test it out. It really is Google's best attempt at trying to make marketing and ads accessible to everybody. And they've done a pretty good job of it. The rising costs are problems, but you just can't ignore these. They're right in your face.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Well, and I guess at least if you're going turn it on, you see what levers you might need to pull, like getting more Google ratings and things like that before you can really even use it. Well, Jim, thank you for explaining this. I must admit, coming into this, did not know the difference really between local services ads and PPC and all the depth there. And I really appreciate you getting into into the back end and into exactly what people are going to be asking about it. So if people want to learn more, y'all have a blog article on why your law firm needs local services ads. And so people can check that out. And if they want to find you guys and talk and maybe get some strategy on that, easiest way to do that, I think, is go to Postali.com.
That's the ticket. Yeah. Thanks, Zack. And yeah, we are very open to just talking strategy about these. If you're running them on your own and just want a second look, or if you say, I want to be totally hands off and can you just do this for us? Both of those things are cool with us.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, Jim, again, thanks for being with me. I appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks. See ya.